uh, coupon rate and face value. Okay, they do not change, but the rate at which you discount them is the market determined number. Market may think that 5% is the proper number now, but if 2 years from now Fed does a lot of rate cutting, maybe they can say, okay, 4% is a better number now. That's what the market determines. But that does not change the coupon rate. There are bonds that we're going to talk about in abstract called variable rate bonds or floating rate bonds. What they pay as a coupon actually changes over time. They typically depend upon some sort of index. For example, in the US, most variable rate bonds are based on prime rate. Do you guys know what prime rate is by any chance? Prime rate is the interest rate banks charge to their best customers. Okay. More often than not, you add 3 percentage points to the upper end of the Fed's target range. Right now it's 525, 550. So the prime is 850. For example, I have a home equity line that I had about 9 years ago. It is at prime -1. That means I'm paying 7.5% on that now. But if 2 months from now, Fed goes down on the rates, 25 basis points, prime is going to come down to 825. After that point, I'm going to pay 825. So that's a variable rate loan. A floating rate bond is a bond where the coupon rate is variable. And typically it's a fixed index plus a spread. And that spread depends upon the credit quality. If Treasury is buying, they probably would pay Treasury prime -3. Okay. But if Apple is borrowing, more than likely they would pay something like prime -2. But a junk bond borrower, which means their investment grade is below triple B, the so-called investment grade, more than likely double B would get about prime in the bond market, and single B would get probably prime +1, because there's a chance that those guys could default. Even Apple has a chance to default, and Apple has outstanding bonds. They do not trade at the same rate at the Treasury. Apple pays probably about 0.5 percentage points above Treasury pays. Why? Because even Apple could go down in 30 years. You guys know the story of Apple? Apple started as a uh, kind of a first almost mass market personal computers. This was before IBM. They did their first computer in 1978. It was novel. They actually had something called mouse, and they had graphical user interface. Before that, most computer interface was based on a command line. Okay, a prompt appeared, and you wrote commands on that line. Okay, and a little later on, when IBM PCs came, they ran on something called DOS, which is short for Disk Operating System. But since they were much cheaper, and Apple also was very peculiar about, they didn't want to use Intel's chips. They had their own chips because they optimized it for their own code, whatever. Anyway, that's how the Macintosh started. And early 80s, they were doing pretty well. Uh, there were three guys who started Apple. One of them was Steve Jobs. The other was Steve Wozniak. And the third one was Paul somebody, the guy who owns two teams in Seattle. Seattle Supersonics, the basketball team, assuming they're still there, and the football team, what are they called? Chargers now? No, Seahawks. That's how much I know about football. I mean, I watch it if Patriots are playing because, I have New England roots, so to speak. That's about it. Anyway, they're doing very well. Then 1982 came, IBM decided, okay, these Apple guys are making some money on this. IBM was into the mainframe computers. I mean, in 1980s, the mainframe computer was as big as this room, okay? And it had a whopping memory of maybe 256 megabytes, okay? In 1950, a 5 megabyte memory computer was bigger than a semi truck. Technology, you know. Anyways, Microsoft came, and these guys, they even cheated. That's why I never liked a Microsoft product. I mean, I use this because most of the software I need is in that environment, and I don't want to pay the premium for Mac. And they had two in 1978. They had written an operating system for an Atari computer that was an 8-bit computer. Okay, the new IBM PCs, they were 16 bits. I mean, if you ran a 16-bit, you could probably, not probably, you cannot even run Windows 7 on this one. It would pretty much crawl to a halt. And these are 64 bits now. Instead of writing native code for an IBM PC, you know, Bill Gates is a businessman. He figured, and you have to write the operating systems in assembler language, the machine code. It's not like writing code on C++, or at that time you had Fortran, something like C was there as well. Said, okay, we're going to write codes in the native language that's going to instruct IBM PC that you are now an Atari 8-bit machine. Okay, so computer turns on, that code runs. Suddenly, IBM PC believes it's an 8-bit Atari. Well, they already had the code for the operating system done. This is called emulation. Okay? In fact, you can run Windows on a Mac using an emulator. It slows it down, but you could. That's why I never liked Microsoft products. When the people behind ChatGPT, when they were supported by Microsoft, I said, that thing is not going to go anywhere. They're going to have all sorts of problems. It's Microsoft corporate culture, and they are having issues. But, you know, Apple suddenly had competition. They still had a dedicated client base, especially graphic art people. They were into all of that. In 1982, laptops didn't even exist, but whatever existed, we didn't have any mice. I didn't see a computer mice until I came to US in 1987, and I go into the little computer lab for grad students. There were these little square box machines. They were called a Mac Plus. They had a whopping 1 megabyte of memory. Okay, and they also had 2 megabytes of hard disk. And the PCs we had didn't have a hard disk. We had a floppy disk with 540K storage capacity. You guys have it so easy now. Anyway, they started losing business, and they still didn't want to use Intel chips. By 1995 or so, Apple was doing pretty bad. They actually decided to fire Steve Jobs. He was the CEO. They fired him. Things got even worse. By 2000, they were on the verge of declaring bankruptcy. As one last move, they said, okay, Steve, come back. Steve comes. What is the first product he does? Anyone knows? This was probably done before some of you guys were born. It was called an iPod. Okay. It was a little thing that played songs randomly. It wasn't even, you know, you could put them in an order. You put songs in there using something called iTunes. And once you put songs in there, you can even control the order of play. And then came even smaller stuff, iPod Nano, that was even smaller. And by 2007, they had the iPhone, then the iPad, and you know the story. But when you looked at Apple in 1982, they looked like at the forefront of tech, very profitable company, and they issued bonds to finance stuff. Those days, venture capital system wasn't that well developed, so companies actually issued bonds to get financing. And by 2000, that company, if Steve Jobs said, "Man, I ain't coming back to you guys," okay? You know, there's an old saying in Turkish: uh, "If you love somebody, send them away. If they come back, that means they couldn't find anybody better, send them again anyway." So Steve Jobs could have said that. He didn't, because they had bought him out of his shares, so he didn't have any financial interest to come back. He came back and saved the company. So looking in 1982, Apple is the obvious non-loser, right? But by 2000, those bonds were trading below junk bond territory. It was that bad. So just because Apple is doing so well now doesn't mean it will do so well, uh, you know, 20 years from now. Anybody remembers Yahoo as an internet search company? Before Google, there was Yahoo. And in 1996, 97, when they came out, the valuations were sky high, right? Then Google came, and I know some people who still have a Yahoo email address, but Yahoo is no longer there. Or think of MySpace.